Hello, everyone. Excuse me. Today, we're going to discuss the social contract. Now, many people talk about the social contract in an abstract manner when they're talking about our role with the government, but most people don't even know what the social contract is or who wrote it, what its origins are. It was based on writings from Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And so I have been reading it. I haven't gotten through the entire book, but it's broken up in sections. So today we're going to discuss book one because it basically explains how we got to this point where we are right now, where the government controls everything. What is the social contract? Um, it later discusses the role of government and what the government's duties are with respect to individual rights and all that. But um, like I said, I'm going to break it up in sections because it's a lot of material to get through, and I'm going to be adding my commentary. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. The social contract or principles of political right, but the actual book, because I have the book, I have the actual printed version of it from the library, but I use a PDF so that I could highlight it and so that you can read along with me. This is the forward. This little treatise is part of a longer work which I began years ago without realizing my limitation and long since abandoned. Of the various fragments that might have been extracted from what I wrote, this is the most considerable and I think the most unworthy of being offered to the public. The rest no longer exists. Book one. I mean to no inquiry if, in the civil order, there can be any sure and legitimate rule of administration, men being taken as they are and laws as they might be. In this inquiry, I shall endeavor always to unite what right sanctions with what is prescribed by my interests. By interest, in order that justice and utility may in no case be divided. I enter upon my task without proving the importance of the subject. I shall be asked if I am a prince or a legislature to write on politics. I answer that I am neither, and that is why I do so. If I were a prince or a legislature, I should not waste time in saying what wants doing. I should do it or hold my peace. As I was born a citizen of a free state, a member of the sovereign, I feel, however feeble the influence of my voice can have on public affairs, the right of voting the right of voting on them makes it my duty to study them. And I am happy when I reflect upon governments to find my inquiries always furnish me with new reasons for loving that of my own country. Now, voting is very powerful, but the only reason that it doesn't have as much power as it should is because of the dilution of the vote, which is going to be overpopulation. I mean, he doesn't discuss that in his book, but that's something like with overpopulation, you're basically diluting the power of your individual vote. And basically, you get to a point where your individual voice doesn't matter. So, the way that these political institutions work now, you basically have to form associations to have any type of power. You have to form political parties. You have to form super PACs. You have to get organized because you as an individual don't matter. And the more the population expands, the less your individual voice is going to count. But at the same time, because you are subject to the laws and subject to whatever the state of society says, it is your duty to be involved, even if you don't actually vote. And I know some people vote because they're conscientious objectors. Some people feel that if you vote, that you're basically you're giving legitimacy to an illegitimate system. And I get that, right? If you are conscientious, then you know, that is a valid reason for whatever your choice is. But I think there are some people who just don't want to vote just because they're apathetic and they're lazy, and they think that this doesn't apply to them, but it does apply to you. The government controls whether you eat, sleep, or shit. So if you don't vote, and these people are controlling every aspect of your life, you may not see it, but you're getting pulled over by road pirates. They're controlling your body, your reproductive functions. They're controlling whether you can get married, the taxes. Um, for you to have that power and for you to not exercise it, that's part of your enslavement. I mean, we do have a two-party duopoly, but at the same time, we can change that. Most people don't vote anyway. The majority does not vote. So if you're complaining about the system, you're not doing anything to change it. And I'm not saying that voting, because I don't think that voting alone is going to change anything. But you need to be an active participant in the political process in some manner. Um, Even if you want to support oppositions, which I support. I mean, I consider myself an independent, but I do support the Green Party, specifically Jill Stein. I think if Jill Stein wasn't running, I probably would not support the Green Party. But it is what it is. I don't support political parties. I look at the candidates, and I do like the Green Party platform for the most part. But at the same time, I am more on the libertarian anarchist side. So okay, let's continue because I don't want to lose people. Let's see if I have any comments before I get started. No comments yet. Okay. All right. So the subject of the first book: man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. One thinks himself the master of others and still remains a greater slave than they. How did this change come about? I do not know. What can make it legitimate? That question I think I can answer. Now, here's the thing: the people who control us, right? They seem like they're in power. They seem very powerful, but that's actually an ignorant way of looking at it. They're actually more enslaved than us. And I would say that even human beings are more enslaved than animals. We don't really rule over animals. Animals are really controlled by their instincts. So no matter what you do, animals are going to revert back to their natural instinct. Human beings can be completely shaped and molded by society, completely programmed to where they become an entire different animal than they were in their state of nature. So um, we have been conditioned to be enslaved. And he's going to explain how all of this is not natural, how this came about. He really breaks it down step by step, how this evolution actually occurs. If I took into account only force and the effects derived from it, I should say as long as people is compelled to obey and obeys, it does well as soon as it can shake off the yoke and shakes it off. It does still better for regaining its liberty by the same right as took it away. Either it is justified in resuming it, or there was no justification for those who took it away. So here's the thing: your liberty was taken by force, right? And they didn't need any explanation to take away your liberty. So therefore, you don't need to have any justification for taking it back. But the social order is a sacred right, which is the basis of all other rights. Nevertheless, this right does not come from nature and must therefore be confounded on conventions. Before coming to that, I have to prove what I have just exerted. So the social order is not a natural right. That's part of the social contract, which he's going to explain later. But yeah, that's basically what you're getting in return for whatever liberty you gave to the sovereign. All right. The most ancient of all societies and the only one that is natural is the family. Remember how I told y'all how the family, I said government, it's not really a government, but is the family is a natural society. The relationship between the child and the parent is a society. And that's basically association, the socialization that you get before you're introduced to the government. And I think Aristotle explained this first, that human beings gather based on family, community, and then polity. So yeah, he's taken from what Aristotle said. And even so, the children remain attached to the father so long as they need him for their preservation. As soon as as soon as this need ceases, the natural bond is dissolved. The children released from the obedience they owe to the father, and the father released from the care he owed his children, return equally to independence. If they remain ununited, they continue so no longer naturally but voluntarily, and the family itself is then remained by convention. When you're a child, that is a natural association, right? That's something that's by nature. But when you become an adult, that is voluntary based on how your parents treat you, right? You don't have to stay involved with your parents as an adult. Once you become self-sufficient, you can leave and, as the Bible say, go cleave to your spouse. Excuse me. Let me slow down because I'm just all over the place. This common liberty results from the nature of man. His first law is to provide for his own preservation. His first cares are those which he owes to himself, and as soon as he reaches years of discretion, he is the sole judge of the proper means of preserving himself, and consequently becomes his own master. Well, that would be true in theory, but no, you don't really have any right to control your own self-preservation. We live in a state of collectivism where um, you're basically your brother's keepers, and you're limited by your brother's ability to preserve for himself. So, for example, because some people are not smart enough to decide who they want to hire for their own services, we're going to have the government come in and say, "Oh, you need a license for this, you need a license for that," because we're going to prevent you from working in order to protect those who are not competent enough to make their own decisions. So you really don't have a natural right to preserve, at least they're not recognize it, a natural right to your own self-preservation that the government has the power. I mean, in Marbury versus Medicine, they say the power to tax is the power to destroy, but no, it's the power to license is the power to destroy, because once the government gets its hands on your ability to earn a livelihood, they can actually destroy your life. And it's a lot of power to have. It's a lot of power to cede to these sovereigns. Um, yeah, I don't know if the trade-off is really worth it, just because a minority of people are not able to make their own decisions. The family then may be called the first model of political societies. The ruler corresponds to the father and the people to the children, and all being born free and equal alienate their liberty only for their own advantage. The whole difference is that in the family, the love of the father is for his children, repays him for the care he gives them, while in a state, the pleasure of commanding takes a place of love which the chief cannot have for the peoples under him. Okay, I want y'all to let that sink in, because for some reason, people think that the government is some nebulous institution that serves the common good, that the government has your um, well-being in mind. No, the government doesn't give two shits about you. Um, so, like I said, the family is the first and natural society. Well, the government is an unnatural society. It's based on what he says, convention. And so, what the government gets is the power of being in charge, right? That's what they get. Whereas in the in the society of a family, the father, I don't know why they keep saying father, because it's the mother too. The parents get love from their children. That's what they even decide all these studies about the evolution of a child's laughter, because the tone of a baby's laughter allows the parents to bond with the child. So all those things are matter. If you have a crying baby that's just annoying, um, they're not going to get the care and attention that they would want. That's why babies evolve to have, to bond with their parents. Let me see if I have any comments. No, no comments yet. Okay. I'm gonna have to break this up because this is only 10 pages, but with my commentaries, it's going to be a long live stream. Grotius denies that all human power is established in favor of the government and quotes slavery as an example. His usual method of reasoning is constantly to establish right from fact. It would be possible to employ a more logical method, but none could be more favorable to tyrants. By the way, I'm going to be explaining Christianity to y'all, because Christianity is highly favorable to tyranny. This the whole mindset of Christianity. He explains all of that. As a shepherd is of a nature superior to that of his flock, the shepherds of men, i.e., their rulers, are of a nature superior to that of the peoples under them. Thus, Philo tells us the Emperor Caligula reasoned, concluding equally well either the kings were gods or that men were beasts. The reasoning of Caligula agrees with that of Hobbes and Grotius. Aristotle, before any of them, had said that men are by no means equal naturally, but some are born for slavery and others for dominion. Okay, he's going to explain it, so I'm not going to comment yet. Aristotle was right, but he took the fact for the cause. Nothing can be more certain than every man is born in slavery. Every man born in slavery is born for slavery. Slaves lose everything in their chains, even the desire of escaping from them. Their love for the, they love their servitude as the comrades Ulysses loved their Brutus condition. If then there are slaves by nature, it is because there have been slaves against nature. Made the slave, excuse me, force made the first slaves, and their cowardice perpetuated the condition. Now, I'm going to choose my words very carefully, but it is what it is. At a certain extent, you really have to be a coward to be a slave, and I'm saying this as someone who is a descendant of slaves. And in order to be enslaved, the main fear you would have to have would be a fear of dying. Um, I don't really have that fear, and I think overcoming that fear is powerful because it's hard to enslave someone who's not afraid to die. Um, but I mean, he's going to explain later that the problem is that even though you accept your enslavement, you are passing that bondage down to future generations, and you don't have the right to do that. You don't have the right to. You can enslave yourself, but you don't have the right to enslave your children. So, at the very least, you do have a duty to protect your children. I had said nothing of King Adam or Emperor Noah, father, father of the three great monarchs who shared out the universe like the children of Saturn, whom some scholars have recognized in them. I trust to getting due thanks for my consideration for being a discreet descendant of one of these princes, perhaps of the eldest prince. How do I know that a verification of titles might not leave me the legitimate king of the human race? In any case, there can be no doubt that Adam was sovereign of the world, as Robinson Crusoe was of his island as long as he was the only inhabitant. And this empire had the advantage that the monarch, safe of his throne, had no rebellions, wars, or conspirators to fear. Now, when they talk about natural rights would be what rights you would have in a state of nature if there was no one there to infringe upon your rights. So in a state of nature, if Adam was the only person on earth, then he would have the right to life, liberty, and property. So it's not until other people come into the picture that those rights could be challenged. So the purpose of government is to protect those natural rights. It's not saying that the government creates those rights. Those rights exist by nature. It's just, I mean, I know some people are going to have a hard time, but I think Jean-Jacques Rousseau explained it. I know people think that rights are something that are really at the discretion of the government. No, I mean, it's just that it took men to articulate it, but you can observe this in nature. Um, the whole makes right. He explains all of that. So, for those of you who are naysayers about the existence of rights, we're going to explain all of that. The right of the strongest. The strongest is never strong enough to always be the master unless he transforms strength into right and obedience into duty. Hence, the right of the strongest, which, though to all seeming meant ironically, is laid down as a fundamental principle. But we never have an explanation of this phrase. Force is a physical power, and I fail to see what moral effect it can have. To yield force is an act of necessity, not of will, at the most, an act of prudence. In what sense can it be a duty? So, suppose for a moment that this so called right exists. I maintain that the sole result is a mass of inexplicable nonsense. For if the force creates rights, the effect changes with the cause. Every force that is greater than that the first succeeds its right. As soon as it is possible to disobey, as soon as it is possible to disobey with impunity, disobedience is legitimate and the strongest being always in the right. The only thing that matters is to act so as to become the strongest. So you basically need to get political power because those who are in power, they're always going to be right. They're basically gods. It's like, can God ever be wrong? No. I mean, even if he's contradicting himself, you can read all the contradictions in the Bible, but God is the sovereign, and so who are you to challenge God? Who are you to challenge the government? You can't do anything about it. But what kind of right is that which perishes when force fails? If we must obey per force, there is no need to obey because we ought. If we were not forced to obey, we are under no obligation to do so. Clearly, the word rights adds nothing to force. In this connection, it means absolutely nothing. Obey the powers that be. If this means yield to force, it is a good precept, but superfluous. I can answer for it never being violated. All power comes from God, I admit, but so does all sickness. Does that mean we are forbidden to call in the doctor? A brigand, and that just means like a like bandits, surprises me at the edge of a wood. Must I not merely surrender my purse on compulsion? But even if I could withhold it, am I in conscience bound to give it up? For certainly the pistol he holds is also a power. So government comes at the barrel of a gun. So, I mean, you don't see the violence, but at the end of the day, if you don't obey the government, they're going to force you to obey with brute force. So, every law is an act of violence, every court order, every ordinance, all of that stuff is an act of violence. I mean, and authority based on force without consent is illegitimate. I mean, this is my position. I'm not saying that Jean-Jacques Rousseau wasn't an anarchist, but he still is basically saying he anarchists basically took his argument to say that government authority isn't legitimate because it's not based on consent. Let us then admit that force does not create right and that we are obliged to obey only legitimate powers. In that case, my original question recurs. Let me go back and see if I have any questions or comments. No comments yet? Okay. Slavery. Since no man has a natural authority over his fellow, his force creates no rights. We must conclude that conventions form the basis of all legitimate authority among men. If any individual, says Grotius, can alienate his liberty and make himself the slave of a master, why could not a whole people do the same and make itself subject to a king? There are in this passage plenty of ambiguous words which would need explaining, but let us confine ourselves to the word alienate. To alienate is to give or to sell. Now, a man who becomes a slave of another does not give himself, he sells himself at the least for his subsistence. You are selling yourself for rock bottom, this for your subsistence, this for your liberty. I mean not liberty, but just so you can have some type of order, and that's all you get, and you're okay with it. You're ceding all this authority to the government and you're getting very little in return. But for what does a people sell itself? A king is far from furnishing his subjects with their subsistence, that he gets his own only from them. They can't survive without us. That's okay. I forgot to mention that earlier when I was talking about how the masters are more enslaved than the slaves. Um, they need us for their survival. Without us, they're done. They don't even have basic survival skills. They don't produce anything. And y'all look at these lawyers, these judges, these politicians, and you see yourselves as being beneath them. No, you are their masters. You are their masters, and they need you way more than you need them. Do subjects then give their persons on condition that the king takes their goods also? I fail to see what they have left to preserve. It will be said that the despot assures his subjects civil tranquility. Granted, but what do they gain? If the wars his ambition brings upon them, his insatiable avidity, and the vexation conduct of his ministers press harder on them than their own dissensions would have. What do they gain if the very tranquility they enjoy is one of his misery or one of their miseries? Tranquility is found in dungeons, but is that enough to make them desirable places to live in? The government is making your lives a living hell, and all you're getting is social order. But at the same time, everybody's miserable. Depression is has never been higher than ever before. So many people are depressed. They're on antidepressants. They have to constantly seek counseling, and we think that we're better than previous generations just because we have advanced technology. But no, we're not. People are not happy because we have been raised in the age of technology. It's hard to go back to that, right? But at the same time, we're miserable. All You're giving up so much liberty just to have order. Um, Jean-Jacques Rousseau talks about tumult, not in this book. I don't remember which book it was, but I'm going to be addressing that also. That you need to have chaos in order to have any type of progress. Um, it doesn't necessarily have to be violence, but it has to be some type of civil disobedience or something that makes things uncomfortable for a short duration so that you can. Some people talk about what do you call that, dark feminism. I don't know if y'all study like the Indian Hindu religion. I don't need to talk about that, but dark feminism is all about chaos, so you get order out of chaos. um but to just maintain a status quo, no, that's not good enough. You're just basically enslaving your own children. To say that a man gives himself gratuitously is to say what is absurd and inconceivable. Such an act is null and illegitimate from the mere fact that he who does it is out of his mind. To say the same of a whole people is to suppose a people of madmen, and madness creates no right. So you have an entire society of people who enslave themselves to the government. Um, that doesn't make it legitimate. These people are not of sound mind. Um, and even if they want to be slaves, they have no right to enslave others. So, okay, I'm going to continue going because I don't want to get ahead of myself. Even if each man could alienate himself, he could not alienate his children. They are born men and free. Their liberty belongs to them, and no one but they has the right to dispose of it. Okay, this is something that the anarchists talk about when it comes to the social contract, because I forget which one it was, but I did do content about it. One of them, I'll come up with his name later. I need to. Anyway, he was basically saying that a social contract is only valid to the current generation. That past generations have no authority to bind future generations to a social contract. That each new generation needs to form their own social contract. So whatever social contract that existed back in 1780, whatever, that's not valid. it's not based on consent just because they agree to it. Like, I mean, a lot of people think that the Constitution is an evolving document. Um, but I don't know. I think we do need a new social contract. When I talk about anarchy, I'm not saying that I'm against all authority. What I'm saying is that the system what we have now is illegitimate. That is not based on the consent of the governed. And so we basically need to dissolve the current system and create something new. What we have right now is bullshit. And so it's not to say that we're just going to have complete chaos. No, you have to tear down what we have now and replace it with something better. Something I mean, this constitution is so outdated, right? And although there are amendments, I think this system is too far gone for it to ever be capable of representing the will of the people. So the problem is that it's so centralized, not just at the federal level, but also at the state level. If things were done locally, it would be it would be possible to correct to self-correct. But because things are so centralized, it's impossible for the government to ever represent the will of the people. So yeah, I think the system is too broken to repair it. We need to create a new system altogether. Let me go see if there are any comments. Honestly, even with these advancements in society, I think this is the most miserable humanity has ever been. It will only get worse. Exactly. Um, it actually makes it more. It makes it easier for them to enslave us because we're under constant control, and it makes it easier to track us. We have social security numbers. We have driver's licenses. Like you're like I said before, if you were a whore in one town in the past, you could pick up and go to a new town and create a whole new reputation. It didn't follow you wherever you went. But now, whatever is on the internet, it's going to stick with you forever. So yeah, I don't think this is good. I mean, people keep talking about how people who don't live in developed countries are savages. Like I was saying in the beginning of this live stream, the masters are more enslaved than the servants. So America is the ruling elite for the rest of the world, and we're the most enslaved out of everybody. Come on now, come on. These third worlders, although they don't have technology, they're better off than we are. Okay, where was I? Okay, let me just read the entire paragraph because I don't know where. Even if each man could alienate himself, he could not alienate his children. They are born free, and their liberty belongs to them, and no one but they have has the right to dispose of it. Before they come to years of discretion, the Father can, in their name, lay down conditions for their preservation and well-being, but he cannot give them irrevocable and without conditions. Such a gift is contrary to the ends of nature and exceed the rights of paternity. It would therefore be necessary, in order to legitimize an arbitrary government, that in every generation the people should be in a position to accept or reject it. That's what I just said. I mean, I know this is in there, but I heard this before by one of those anarchists, and I think a lot of that came from Jean-Jacques Rousseau. But were this so, the government would no longer be arbitrary. If every generation had to renew the social contract, the government would be forced to serve the will of the people. So the fact that it is not our contract, it was made by our forefathers, makes it inherently illegitimate. To renounce liberty is to renounce being a man, to surrender the rights of humanity and even its duties. For him who renounces everything, no indemnity is possible. Such a renunciation is incompatible with man's nature. To remove all liberty from his will is to remove all morality from his actions. This is what I'm about to argue with at this speeding ticket. I'm about to make a Supreme Court case out of this because if I'm a slave, I'm a subject, I don't even have the right to die because the government basically owns me. Then how am I obligated to follow the law? You already own me. How are you going to impose a fine against me when you already own me as well as all of my property? So for you to try to impose a fine against me, is a legal impossibility. You can't sue yourself. The state is protected with sovereign immunity, and I am a slave of the state. Therefore, I am protected with sovereign immunity. That's going to be my argument. I don't know how far he's going to go, but um, when I made that argument, I didn't even read this part of it, so I came up with that on my own when I was reading the 13th Amendment. It's ridiculous. I mean, I told y'all how the city their tree fell on my fence and they claimed immunity. So they can destroy my property with impunity, but I'm going to be held to strict liability when it comes to going over the speed limit. No showing of intent, no victim, strict liability just because they say so. But they're protected with immunity even when there is an actual victim. So my property doesn't belong to them, to me, excuse me. They can destroy my property and there's nothing, I have no recourse. This is ridiculous. This is tyranny. How is it that they can do that? Who would want the government as a damn neighbor? You can't even get compensated for damages because they're protected with immunity. Okay, so I do want to address the fact that to renounce liberty is to renounce being a man. How can you have any respect for yourself, and how can your children respect you as a man, or I'm going to say, or as a woman, right? But traditionally men are supposed to be the head of the household. Um, you're a slave. And I know people don't like when I use that word. I'm using it, I'm not talking about chattel slavery. I'm talking about it in a different context. You are a slave, that you don't actually own your life, that you are forced to work. You don't even get to keep the fruits of your labor. The government has absolute authority over you. Um, how can anybody respect you? You're not even the head of your own household. You're not really, the government is in your house, controlling what kind of relations you have, controlling your reproductive functions. It's absolutely absurd. Finally, it is an empty and contradictory convention that sets up on the one side absolute authority and on the other unlimited obedience. So we get absolute authority and unlimited obedience. You see it when the police arrest you, they say, stop resisting, disobey, obey my lawful order. Huh? It is not clear that we can be under no obligation to a person from whom we have the right to exact anything. Does not this condition alone, in the absence of equivalence or exchange, in itself involve the nullity of the act? For what right can my slave have against me when all that he has belongs to me, and his right being mine, the right of mine against myself is devoid of meaning? So how can you sue me for or hold me liable to a fine when I'm your slave? What I have belongs to you anyway. It's absolutely absurd. And you can't sue the government because they're protected with sovereign immunity. I explained to y'all that you can't sue the government itself, but you can sue state actors under 42 USC 1983. You can sue them in their official or individual capacities, but even then, they're still protected with qualified immunity. But you can't sue the state directly. Grotus and the rest find in war another origin for the so-called right of slavery. The victor having, as they hold, the right of killing the vanquished. The latter can buy back his life at the price of his liberty, and this convention is more legitimate because it is to the advantage of both parties. But it is clear that this supposed right to kill the conqueror is by no means deducible from the state of war. Men, from the mere fact, while they are living in their primitive independence, he's talking about the state of nature, they have no mutual relations stable enough to constitute either the state of peace or the state of war, cannot be natural enemies. War is constituted by a relation between things, not between persons, and as the state of war cannot arise out of simple personal relations, but only out of real relations, private war or war of man with man can exist neither in a state of nature where there is no constant property, nor in a social state where everything is under the authority of laws. This is why it is impossible for the Palestinians to be at war with Israel. They don't have a state. They don't have sovereignty. Um, they're basically just slaves trying to resist their oppressor. But this is the reason why the international community doesn't respect rights of the Palestinians, because I mean he's going to explain a little bit further, but basically without it, okay, he talks about princes, right? The sovereigns. They only respect the rights of other sovereigns or the authority of other sovereigns. So individuals don't really matter. They're going, it's just like a household. When you look at a man and his wife, right? And I hate to be misogynistic, but a lot of times women get more protection when they're married, not because they care about women, but because they protect the rights of the man. And so if a married woman is violated, then you're basically violating the rights of the husband, right? And it's the same thing with statism. When you violate the rights of the subject, then you are violating the rights of the sovereign. And the international community respect that more than they respect the rights of individuals. So if you don't have a sovereign, you don't have sovereignty or independence, then you're basically fair game. I mean, it sounds. I mean, because a lot of people have this discussion, they're trying to figure out why don't anybody care about the Palestinians? It's because they don't have sovereignty, and it's the same thing with Black people in America. We don't have I mean, okay, um, yeah, okay. I didn't mean to say that yet because that's in a different context when I'm talking about reparations. But the reason why we're not going to get reparations is because we don't have sovereignty, and it's impossible to get reparations without sovereignty. Um, you're just giving money out to individual people. It's a completely useless conversation. I don't know why these so-called Black leaders don't understand that. I think it's mainly because they're trying to profit from it. But you have to have a sovereign. You have to have someone who is the head of it in order to have any type of recognition from world leaders or even domestic leaders. Let me see if there are any comments before I. Yes, I'm saying the government controls our whole life. Of course they do. What can you do without? Yeah, the government controls everything you do, even just grocery shopping. The government controls everything. You can't even own property. You can't do anything without the government. You can't even raise your own children. Yeah, the government controls everything. I don't think that's even debatable. Um, I guess the question is whether their authority is legitimate, and I don't think it is. Okay, individual combats, duels, and encounters are acts which cannot constitute a state, while the private wars authorized by the establishments of Louis, King of France, and suspended whatever. In itself, an absurd system for everyone and contrary to the principle of natural right and to all good policy. So there's no such thing as a civil war. You can't have a war from subjects. It has to be a war between sovereigns. Um, Now you can have a war between states. That's I mean I don't know if you, yeah that's yeah, that is possible because those are sovereigns fighting against each other. But you can't have people fighting against each other. That's not a war. War then is a relation not between man and man, but between state and state. Did I read that already? Let me just read this. War then is a relation between man and man, but not between, excuse me, and individuals are enemies only accidental, not as men nor even as citizens, but as soldiers, not as members of their country, but as its defenders. Finally, each state can have four enemies only for other states and not men, for between things disparate in nature, there can be no real relation. Okay, so You're not. That's the thing. When you're at war, you're not really fighting for yourself. You're fighting for your state. So that's why it's impossible to have war without sovereignty. Um, right. And then, yeah, he's going to explain all of that. Okay. Furthermore, this principle is in conformity with the established rules of all times and the constant practice of all civilized people. Declarations of war are imitations, intimidations less to powers than to their subject. The foreigner, whether the king, individual, or people who robs, kills, or detains a subject without declaring war on the prince is not an enemy, but a brigand. I told you what a brigand is. Even in real war, a just prince, while laying hands in the enemy's power, on all thing that belongs to the public, respects the lives and goods of individuals. He respects rights on which his own are founded. The object of war being the destruction of the hostile state, the other side has a right to kill its defenders while they are bearing arms. But as soon as they lay them down and surrender, they cease to be enemies or instruments of the enemy and become once more merely men whose life no one has any right to take. Sometimes it is possible to kill the state without killing a single member of its members. And war gives no right which is not necessary to the gaining of its subject. These principles are not those of Grotius. They are not based on the authority of poets, but derived from the nature of reality based on reason. Um, yeah, so it's not the people. I mean, the people are just collateral damage. You're fighting the state, and once the war is over, then they basically become your subjects. Um, it doesn't really make sense for Israel to oppress the Palestinians because they don't have a state, so therefore they're not really enemies. Um, the problem is that they're not subjects either, so they're just off doing their own thing. They're not subject to the laws of Israel or the protection of Israel. So, but at the same time, it's impossible to have a war with them. They're um, even if you say what is their not is it not Hamas? Oh yeah, Hamas. Hamas is not a state, so it's impossible for Hamas to wage war. They're just civilians. I mean, he already said how absurd it is for individuals to wage war. It's not possible. You can't even make demands. The right of conquest has no foundation other than the right of the strongest. If war does not give the conqueror the right to massacre the conquered peoples, the right to enslave them cannot be based upon a right which does not exist. No one has a right to kill an enemy except when he cannot make him a slave, and the right to enslave him cannot therefore be derived from the right to kill him. This, I mean, when you talk about slavery in America, it's like you already enslave, you know, Africans and their descendants. Why would you kill your own slave? Why would you abuse? What was the whole hatred about? These are people who provide for you. These are people who take care of your children and produce your crops. Um, they already surrendered. They already are laying down and obeying you. What reason would you have to hate them when they pose no threat to you, except the fact that they want their freedom? But yeah, I don't understand the whole basis of hating someone who's already submitting to you. It is accordingly an unfair advantage to make him buy at the price of his at the price of his liberty, his life, over which the victor holds no right. It is not clear that there's a vicious circle in founding the right of life and death, and on the right of slavery, and the right of slavery on the right of life and death. Even if were to assume this terrible right to kill everybody, I maintain that a slave made in war or a conquered people is under no obligation to a master except to obey him as far as is compelled to do so. By taking an equivalent for his life, the victor has not done him a favor. Instead of killing him without profit, he has killed him usefully. So far, then, he is from acquiring him any authority. In addition to that of force, the state of war continues to subsist between them. Their mutual relation is the effect of it, and the usage of the right of war does not imply a treaty of peace. A convention has indeed been made, but this convention, so far from the destroying the state of war, presupposes its continuance. So, a slave made in war or conquered people are under no obligation to obey their masters except to the extent that they are compelled to do so. Therefore, the descendants of slaves who are basically a conquered people are have no duty to obey. I'm sorry, y'all. I don't know if I'm going too far with this, but it is what it is. If you're not part of the social contract in the first place, this is not your government. This is not your system. Um, your only obligation is to your self-preservation. So you have to obey to the extent that you're forced to. But for you to accept into your heart that this is your system, this is your government, you should just obey because the government serves you. No, it doesn't. Um, and you have no duty to see to it that this system perpetuates itself. I don't feel any loyalty to this. Okay, okay. I don't know what to say to it. This system is oppressive. Why would I pledge any loyalty to it? I respect the Constitution to the extent that they're actually following it, but as a descendant of slave, this is bullshit. I don't feel any obligation to obey some damn road pirate who's trying to take my money with a gun on his head. Your authority is illegitimate. And that's why I'm a damn anarchist. I know people think that anarchy is extreme, but no, when you look at it, I am a descendant of conquered people, right? This is not my system. Fuck this. Um, right. That it's not a duty. It's not a duty as Jean-Jacques Rousseau stated. I don't have a duty to obey the law. My only obligation to follow the law is based on force, which is based on my self-preservation. So if I can get away with breaking the law, I I don't this in so many words, even without reading the social contract, this is the way a lot of people feel anyway. You can see it by the fact that they don't follow the law. They don't see it as legitimate. If they did see it as legitimate, they would be following it. But no, they're criminals because they think that this system is illegitimate. They don't feel any type of duty to this system. They don't. They don't feel that they're a part of the social contract. So you can look at them as being violent savages, whatever. But no, the whole system is illegitimate until they are brought into the fold, until they are part of the social contract. Um, this is the result. I mean, let me see if I have any comments. Hi, thank you for this live. What are your thoughts on the world's technological innovations and how is that affect? I don't know. I mean, AI is not part of the social contract. I'm assuming that AI is just going to um, be a tool to oppress us even more because one of the leverage that we have is going to be our labor. And if they can replace us with AI, then we're going to lose leverage. And they can basically use AI to, even in Israel, right? They can just have drones to just kill people and they don't even have to take any risk. So, yeah, I think it's going to be dangerous for liberty, but I haven't given much thought on that. Okay, I think I read that part. So far from whatever aspect we regard the question, the right of slavery is null and void, not only as being illegitimate, but also because it is absurd and meaningless. The word slave and right contradict each other and are mutually exclusive. It will always be equally foolish for a man to say to a man or to people, I make with you a convention wholly at your expense and wholly to my advantage. I shall keep it as long as I like, and you keep it as long as I like. So you have no right to reject the social contract. You can't opt out of it. So they're going to keep it at their discretion. They're going to make you follow it, even though they don't uphold it for themselves. So they don't follow the law. They do whatever they want to do. Um, I mean, gross abuses of power, right? And they get away with it. There are no consequences. But when somebody goes over the damn speed limit, the public is so quick to hold them accountable and say, "Oh, you broke the law. You deserve to be thrown in jail. You deserve to have your hard-earned money taken away." Why? What about all these people? I mean, I didn't harm anybody. What about all these other abuses of power that actually are harming people? Right? You're not going to hold them accountable. You're not going to hold these judges accountable. They get away with this scot free. So it's illegitimate. The social contract is legitimate because it's unilateral. They get to decide when they want to follow it, but we are bound to obey it at all times. Even if I granted all that I have been refuting, the friends of despotism would be no better off. There will always be a great difference between subduing a multitude and ruling a society. Even if scattered individuals were successively enslaved by one man, however numerous they might be, I still see no more than a master and his slaves, and certainly not a people and its ruler. You're not a part of the society, so you're not a member of the society. You're just a conquered people. I see what may be termed an aggregation, but not an association. There is neither public good nor body politic. There is no public good because there is no public. You have a collection of individuals that are bound together by force, but we're so disjointed. And if there's not a public good, then therefore it is impossible for the government to represent the will of the public. There's no such thing as the public or the common. The public is just a collection of individuals. So unless you're protecting the rights of individuals, then you're not protecting the rights of the public. So if you disenfranchise women and say that they can't control their own reproductive functions, you are not representing the will of the public. The government is supposed to represent the general will, not to disenfranchise factions, right? Disenfranchise women, disenfranchise this group or that group. That's not the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be limited government, only to serve the common good, not to rule over their individual rights or infringe on their individual rights. The man in question, even if he is enslaved, excuse me, the man in question, even as he has enslaved half the world, is still only an individual. His interest, apart from that of others, is still a purely private interest. If the same man comes to die, his empire after him remains scattered and without unity, as an oak falls and dissolves into a heap of ashes when the fire has consumed it. A people, says Grotius, can give itself to a king. Then, according to Grotius, a people is a people before it gives itself, right? We were a people before the government. The government is not the alpha and the omega. The gift itself is a civil act. The gift, when you gave yourself to the government, when you ceded your sovereignty to the government, that was a gift. And it implies public deliberation. It would be better, before examining the act by which a people gives itself to a king, to examine that by which it has become a people. For this act become necessarily prior to the other, is the future foundation of the society. Indeed, if there were no prior convention, where, unless the election were unanimous, would be the obligation on the minority to submit to the choice of the majority. How have 100 men who wish for a master the right to vote on behalf of 10 who do not? The law of majority voting is in itself something established by convention and presupposes unanimity on at least one on one occasion at least. Excuse me. Um, so we have a Republican form of government where, I mean, a lot of people think that we have a democracy, which is not the same as a Republican form of government. Majority rules. So if the majority said that women can't control their reproductive functions, they think that it makes it legitimate. And so, what right does the minority or majority have to infringe and impose their will on the minority? Um, well, he's saying that at some point, everybody agreed that it's going to be majority rule. So, um, at that point where they initially agreed to majority rules, then that made it legitimate. Um, I don't know that I agree with that, and I think that if he's saying that the social contract has to be renewed every generation, then that no, that's not true. If the current, well, I think the current generation does believe that majority rules. If the majority says that women can't get have access to abortion, then that's what it is. But um, what about slavery? Why can't the majority decide that we're going to make some people slaves? Right? Why can't the majority? Well, they're already taking private property, but I mean, how far are you going to take that? Majority rules. That doesn't make it right. The whole purpose of a Republican form of government that is not majority rules, we have elected officials who are supposed to protect the rights of the minority and only legislate when it comes to the common good. You know, public roads, uh, the collection of taxes, things like that. But when it comes to individual rights, no, that is beyond the scope of government. Our rights do not come from the Constitution, contrary to popular belief. The social compact, I suppose men to have reached the point at which the obstacles in the way of their preservation in the state of nature show their power of resistance to be greater than the resources at the disposal of each individual for his maintenance in the state. The primitive condition can then subsist no longer, and the human race would perish unless it changed its manner of existence. But as men cannot engender new forces but only unite and direct existing ones, they have no other means of preserving themselves than the formation by aggregation of a sum of forces great enough to overcome the resistance. Remember what I said? You don't have power as an individual. That you have to form associations. You have to form super PACs, political parties. Um, I mean, that's about overpopulation and a dilution of the individual vote, but that probably was always the case. On some level, these have to bring into play by means of a single motive power and to cause, I'm sorry, cause to act in concert. So you have to come together with a common voice in order to have any political power. All this dissension about minute details, no. Come together, figure out what your course of action is going to be. And when you have a united voice, then you have power. But acting as an individual is not going to change anything. This sum of forces can arise only where several persons come together. But as the force and liberty of each man are the chief instruments of his self preservation, how can he pledge them without harming his own interests and neglecting the cares he owes himself? This difficulty and its bearing on my present subject may be stated in the following terms. The problem is to find a form of association which will defend and protect the whole common force, the person and goods of each associate, and in which each, while uniting himself with all, may still obey alone, excuse me, still obey himself alone and remain as free as before. This is the fundamental problem of which the social contract provides a solution. Yeah, there needs to be a social contract, but it needs to be more localized. And I think that we need to have tribal sovereignty. We need to basically break away from the state. The clauses of this contract are so determined by nature. Gosh, I can't. I have a lot more to go, and I may have to split this up because I thought I could get this in, through this. Let me see how many people are still here. Oh, I have 8 people here. Gosh, I didn't realize it was going to take me this long to get through this. The clauses of this contract are so determined by the nature of the act that the slightest modification would make them vain and ineffective, so that although they have perhaps never been formally set forth, they are everywhere the same and everywhere tacitly admitted and recognized until, on the violation of the social compact, each retains his original rights and resumes the natural liberty while losing the conventional liberty in favor of which he renounced it. These clauses, properly understood, may be reduced to one: the total alienation of each associate, together with all his rights to the whole community. For, in the first place, as each gives himself absolutely, the conditions are the same for all, and this being so, no one has any interest in making them burdensome to others. Basically, communism, or I always get communism and socialism mixed, but I think he's talking about communism. Um, I don't know how that. I don't. Yeah, I don't agree with that. I don't. Yeah, to completely alienate yourself as an individual and subject yourself to the whole. No, that is only possible if you have localized governments, right? And voluntary associations. If you have a group where you decided, just like a family, your local community, yeah, you can submit yourself to the collective, right? If it's localized and we all live together, we all get along, we all know each other. I don't think anybody is going to try to harm his neighbors, right? The problem becomes when it becomes centralized, when it becomes the federal government and the state, people in other communities. It's not going to work. Moreover, the alienation being without reserve, the union is as perfect as it can be, and no associate has anything more to demand. For if the individuals retain certain rights, as there would be no common superior to decide between them. Maybe I should skip through some of this. I do want to read this part. Finally, each man in giving himself to all gives himself to nobody. And as there is no associate over whom does not acquire the same right as he yields over himself, he gains an equivalent for everything he loses and an increase of force for the preservation of what he has. I don't know if y'all want me to read this entire thing. I'm only going through 10 pages of this book. There's a lot more, and I'm trying to break it up in sections. I'm just going to go ahead and read it just because I want to get through this and I don't want to have to come back to it. If then we discard from the social compact what is not of its essence, we shall find it reduces itself to the following term: each of us put his person and all of his power in common under the supreme direction of the general will, and in our corporate capacity, we receive each member as individual part of the whole. And once in a common individual personality of each contracting party, this act of association creates a moral and collective body composed of as many members as the assembly contains votes, and receiving from this act its unity, its common identity, its life, and its will. The public person, so formed by the union of all other persons, formerly took the name of the city and now takes that of republic or body politic. It is called the members of the state when passive, sovereign when active, and power when compared with others like itself. Exactly. It's power when it comes to in relation to other sovereigns. Those who are associated in it collectively take the name of people, and severally are called citizens, as sharing sovereign power, and subjects as being under the law of the state. But these terms are confused when taken one for another. It is enough to know how to distinguish them when they are being used in precision. This formula shows us that the act of association comprises a mutual understanding between the public and the individuals, and that the individual, in making a contract, as we may say, with himself, is bound in a double capacity. As a member of the sovereign, he is bound to the individuals, and as a member of the state to the sovereign. So, The people are sovereign and they're also subjects. You have a dual role in a state of society. It doesn't feel like we're the sovereign though. Feels like we're only subjects. That they're basically dictating what should go down. Um, yeah, I don't think they're right. Well, maybe they are to some extent. I think that there are people who do want to take women's reproductive rights, who do want to enslave the rest of society. So, yeah, it's not representing everybody, but it is representing certain people. But the maxim of civil right that no one is bound by undertakings made to himself does not apply in this case, for there is a great difference between incurring an obligation to yourself and incurring one to a whole of which you form a part. But the body politic or the sovereign, drawing its being wholly from the sanctity of the contract, can never bind itself, even to an outsider, to do anything derogatory to the original act. For instance, to alienate any part of itself or to submit to another sovereign. Okay, I think America is submitting itself to other sovereigns. Um, I don't know if y'all need me to spell it out, but we are subordinate to another country. We're writing blank checks, funding genocide. Violation of the act by which it exists would be self-annihilation. That which is itself nothing can create nothing. As soon as this multitude is so united in one body, it is impossible to offend against one of the members without attacking the body, and still more to offend against the body without the members resenting it. Duty and interest therefore equally oblige the two contracting parties to give each other help, and the same men should seek to combine in their double capacity. Double capacity being sovereign and subject, all the advantages dependent upon that capacity. Again, the sovereign being formed wholly of the individuals who compose it, neither has nor can have any interest contrary to theirs, and consequently, the sovereign power need give no guarantee to the subjects, because it is impossible for the body to wish to hurt all its members. No, it's not possible to hurt all its members, because, like I said at the beginning, the natural society is between a father and his children. The society, when it comes to government, the sovereign doesn't get the love of children; it gets power. So if it basically was going against the will of all its members, the sovereignty would dissolve itself. So it's not possible to hurt all its members, but it is possible to hurt some, which is going to basically be minorities. Um, yeah, I don't know if I agree with everything he's saying here. We shall see later on that it cannot hurt any, in particular the sovereign, merely by virtue of what it is. It's always what it should be. This, however, is not the case with the relation of the subjects to the sovereign, which, despite the common interest, would have no security that they would fulfill their undertakings unless it found means to secure itself in their fidelity. So basically, what he's saying is that it's not the sovereign that is hurting the people, it's the people who are hurting themselves. I'm almost done, y'all, I think. Gosh, no, I'm not done at all. I'm not close. Let me know if y'all want me to stop, because I'm almost. I didn't think it would take me this long to get through this. Okay. Let me see if I have any comments. No new comments. Okay. In fact, each individual as a man may have a particular will contrary or dissimilar to the general will which he has as a citizen. His particular interest may speak to him quite differently from the common interest. His absolute and naturally independent existence may make him look upon what he owes to the common good as a gratuitous contribution, the loss of which will do less harm to others than the payment of its burdensome to himself, and regarding the moral person, which constitutes the state as a persona ficta, because not a man, he may wish to enjoy the rights of citizenship without being ready to fulfill the duties of a subject. The continuance of such an injustice would not only prove the undoing of the body politic. Okay, so to the extent that everyone is fulfilling the dual role of being a subject and a sovereign, that would make sense. But the problem is that people don't want to fulfill a role of being a subject and a sovereign. They only want to be the sovereign, so they want to rule over other people. They want to promulgate laws without being subject to it. You can even look at like Donald Trump, right? When he was president, he was raising hell, telling people what they need to do. Now he's being prosecuted under the same system which he used to oppress other people. So there really is no escape. I mean, it's like Ayn Rand said, that he who what is that expression? He who lives by the legalized sword shall perish by the legalized sword. So you want all these laws, you want to oppress people, eventually you're going to oppress yourself. In order that the social compact may not be an empty formula, it tacitly includes the undertaking, which alone can give force to the rest, that whoever refuses to obey the general will shall be compelled to do so only by the whole body. This means nothing less than he will be forced to be free. I wonder what he means by that. For this is the condition by which, given each citizen his country, secures him against all personal dependence. In this lies the key to the working of the political machine. This alone legitimizes civil undertakings, which without it would be absurd, tyrannical, and liable to the most frightful abuses. What do y'all mean? What do y'all think he meant when he said this means nothing less than he will be forced to be free? I have my opinion on it, but I wonder what you think. Okay, I'm losing people. This is not. Maybe I should have skipped this part because this part isn't that interesting, and people are starting to leave. Um, I'm getting down to the last page though. The passage from the state of nature to the civil state produces a very remarkable change in man. By substituting justice for instinct in his conduct and giving his actions the morality that had formerly lacked. Then only when the voice of duty takes the place of physical impulses and right of appetite does man, who so far had considered only himself, find he is forced to act on different principles and to consult his reason before listening to his inclinations. Although in this state he deprives himself of some advantages which he got from nature, he gains in return others so great, his faculties are so stimulated and developed, his ideas so extended, his feelings so ennobled, and his whole soul so uplifted that did not the abuses of this new condition often degrade him below that which he left, he would be bound to bless continually the happy moment which took him from it ever, and instead of stupid and unimaginative animal, made him an intelligent being and man. Right. This is the difference between the state of nature and the state of society. Once you're integrated into society, you basically don't. You're no longer a savage. Now you're an evolved man who doesn't have a desire to oppress other people. Let us draw up the whole account in terms easily commiserable. What man loses by the social contract is his natural liberty and an unlimited right to everything he tries to get and succeed in getting. What he gains is civil liberty and the proprietorship of all he possesses. We were to avoid mistake in weighing one against the other. We must clearly distinguish natural liberty, which is bounded by the strength of the individual, from civil liberty, which is limited by the general will, and possession, which is merely the effect of force or the right of the first occupier from property, which can be founded only on a positive title. So we give up our natural liberty and unlimited right to do whatever we want, and we gain civil liberty and the proprietorship of what we possess. So we get property rights, we get protection from the government. Um, yeah. We might, over and above this, add that to what man acquires in a civil state moral liberty, which alone makes him truly master of himself, for the mere impulse of appetite is slavery, while obedience to law, which we prescribe to ourselves, is liberty. But I have already said too much on this head, and the philosophical meaning of the word liberty does not now concern us. Oh gosh, I didn't think it would take me this long. No comments. No comments. Okay. Each member of the community gives himself to it at the moment of its foundation, just as he, with all the resources at his command, including the good he possesses. This act does not make possession and changing hands change its nature, and property in the hands of the sovereign. But as the forces of the city are incomparably greater than those of an individual, public possession is also, in fact, stronger and more irrecoverable, without being more legitimate, at any rate, the point of view of foreigners. For the state, in relation to its members, is master of all their goods by the social contract, which within the state is the basis of all rights. But in relation to the other powers, it is only by right of the first occupier which it holds from its members. So all property is really owned by the state. This is the reason why sovereignty is so important. You may have your individual property, but in respect to other states, they're only going to respect the sovereign. So the sovereign basically controls your property. You're basically just holding it in trust for the state. It's not really your property. The right of the first occupier, though more real than the right of the strongest, becomes a real right only when the right of the property has already been established. Every man has naturally a right to everything he needs, but the positive act which makes him proprietor of one thing excludes him from everything else. Having his share, he ought to keep it and can have no further right against the community. This is why the right of the first occupier, which in the state of nature is so weak, claims the respect of every man in civil society. I told y'all about natural rights, that he's talking about Adam, right? Adam is the first occupier, but those rights are basically going to be infringed as long as they're as soon as another man comes into the scene. And this right, we are respecting not so much what belongs to another, so much as what does not belong to ourselves. So because you there's a first occupier, and you know that land doesn't belong to you. So really you can't take it from the first occupier except by force. I don't really want to read the rest of it because I don't think it's that relevant. I think I read the most important part, but I can continue going just so that for reference purposes, I did actually get through it. And granting the right of first occupancy to necessity and labor, are we not really stretching it as far as it can go? It is possible to leave such a right unlimited. It is enough to set foot on a plot of common ground in order to be able to call yourself at once the master of it. It is enough that a man has the strength to compel others for a moment in order to establish his right to prevent them from ever returning. How can a man or a people seize an immense territory and keep it from the rest of the world except by a punishable usurpation, since others are being robbed by such an act of the place of habitation and the means of subsistence which nature gave in common? I don't think I need to read this. As y'all can see, I didn't highlight this because I didn't think there was anything really that pertinent here. So I'm just going to go ahead and end this. I think I did get through the important part. Um, Basically, I mean, I know a lot of people talk about the social contract, but they don't really know what it means. Um, at the end of the day, the government is not upholding its end of the social contract. So I think that the contract is null and void, and we need to renegotiate a new contract. I think that we need to decentralize the government and make it more localized, take more power locally, form local tribes, um, not just states, but townships, cities, And we basically need to take power back from the state and the federal government and make it more local. So I think I'm going to conclude this live stream. And I don't think I have anything else to say unless someone else has comments, or if someone wants to come up here, I can post a link and give you time to join. All right, so there's the link. Last time I closed it out, somebody was trying to join the discussion, and I didn't wait long enough. So I'm going to give you at least a full minute before I close this live stream out. All right. Doesn't look like anybody's coming up. So thank you all for joining. I may need to split that up because I know that was a long live stream, and I read a lot of material. But hopefully you guys gained something from this. Yeah, I'm going to be reading the the portion of the social contract as it relates to Christianity, because that was very interesting. So you all have a good day. I'm going to go ahead and close this out.